Good morning. Well, Canada is a country of immigrants, that is said. And as I say, practically every country in this world has been, at one time or the other, been a country of immigrants. Anyway, the fact remains that the Canada is today the center of attraction for most of the immigrants. And the immigrants who want to become the citizens of this country have to pass a test. And the test demonstrates their capability as well as awareness of their basic knowledge of this country. And to prepare for this test, the federal government provides a study guide. This study guide is filled with facts, names, dates. That's what it should be. The history, the political system, and the values of this country. They need to be imbibed and understood. The economic condition, you need to understand. The banking system, you should be aware of before you become citizen of the country. But now it appears that the party in power always tries this guide to be a compendium of information of the political party itself rather than the political system. It is really sad. The current version of the guide was prepared by the Harper government, and now Trudeau government is not happy and they have thought of revising, rather rewriting the citizenship guide. Is it really required? And now, when we think in real sense of the term, it appears that the chief goal of exercise is not providing help to the new citizens, but rather to tackle the bias and the prejudice of the party supporters, and also to ensure that the coming immigrants become loyal followers of the party in power. The Harper version, for example, tells us that the Canadian law prohibits barbaric cultural practices that tolerate spousal abuse, honor killing, female genital mutilation, forced marriages, or other gender-based violence. It also says that one of the chief responsibilities of the citizenship, along with obeying the law and the order, is serving in the juries and getting a job, taking care of one's family and working hard. Now the conservatives might say, what's wrong with this? And the liberals, on the other hand, argue, well, this is a typical conservative bashing of the immigrants' culture and work ethics. And that explains why, under the liberals, the reference to the barbaric cultural practices and the responsibility of getting a job are not in the draft, in the new guide that is proposed to be released shortly. Now, why is the responsibility of not getting a job bad? Do you want more unemployed people? Or do you want parasites who live only on welfare and then they vote for your party? What's wrong with saying that we do not like honor killing, female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and gender-based violence, when we are all the time saying that there should be gender equality and equity? You see, unfortunately, the guide has become a platform where the political parties fight for their membership. And do you know that Trudeau government's canon will soon be included in the mandatory responsibilities, along with obeying the law and doing the jury duty? They are going to add filing out the census and respecting treaties with the indigenous people. That's what. Now, respecting treaties with the indigenous people is not the responsibility of the immigrants or the citizens. It's the responsibility of the federal and the provincial governments. So whether you provide it in a citizenship guide or not is immaterial. Apart from the fact that either you tell them what the indigenous treaties are and how the immigrants are going to be involved in respecting them. But just saying that respect the treaties doesn't bear any sense. Now, I imagine that tomorrow NDP comes in power. Let's suppose. I hope they don't, because their record in Alberta and Ontario has been horrible. But anyway, even if assuming, let's be apolitical, because they're a national party and they were the party in opposition. So if they come in power, then they'll rewrite this guide and they'll say that the immigrants shall support the right to collective bargaining. That is one of the responsibilities of Canadian citizenship. And that color orange is not only for Halloween purposes. I mean, say, this can be really stretching a bit, but then, yes, collective bargaining, they would definitely like to include. The proposed citizenship guide, which is being graded, re-evaluated, is likely to mislead the new Canadians. You know, the new manual would read like a liberal campaign platform. Perhaps it's not surprising because the liberals control the government. Maybe to some extent it might be fair. But is it really fair to the country? And is it really fair to the new immigrants? Edition reads, today Canadians, for example, can own their own home and buy land thanks to the treaties that the government negotiated. But then, just a moment's reflection. This state cannot be correct. Land cession treaties were never as negotiated in the Atlantic provinces. Most of the Quebec and most of the British Columbia were not a party to the negotiations. So how do you say the government negotiated? The provincial governments never negotiated it. It is only a couple of provinces which negotiated it. As I said, Atlantic provinces didn't negotiate. Quebec and the British Columbia. But Canadians can own homes and buy land in those districts. In the same way, they can buy in Ontario and Prairie provinces, where land cessation treaties were signed with the First Nations. So this is a misleading statement. And the ability of the Canadians to own land and home depends upon grants of the land by the sovereign. Thus, according to the English legal tradition, sovereignty includes the title to the land, which the sovereign can subsequently grant to the individuals or corporations. Most Canadian sovereignty rests upon earlier British and French sovereignty founded upon discovery, conquest, establishment of the government with the ability to police and enforce territorial boundaries, administer law, and then get recognition by other sovereign states. So, they have no legal standing, this part, A, and then it's misleading. Now, let's, for the moment, recognize that the indigenous land rights, including full ownership in certain circumstances. But the Supreme Court of Canada has consistently upheld that Canadian sovereignty is the base of the Constitution. And one of the Chief Justices, as a matter of fact, Juan Dupree, said so, the reconciliation of the pre-existing of Aboriginal societies with the sovereignty of the Crown. So, from the beginning, the French, the British, and the Canadian sovereigns have made grants of the land upon a system of private land ownership that has been developed. The grants did not depend on prior negotiation of the treaties with the First Nations. If that had been so, there would be no private property today in Canada at all. Ironically, the private property in land does not exist even today in the indigenous reserves. This deficiency in the Indian Act is the only one of the ways in which the property rights of the First Nations have been abused. But the mistake in one area does not mean that the private property rights of the Canadians depend upon the treaties. Then this is not the end. There is another misleading statement in the revised Citizenship Guide. And this is advice to the new Canadians about the legal obligations. It reads, obeying the law, serving on jury, paying taxes, filling out the census, and respecting treaties with the indigenous people are mandatory. Treaties were legal agreements between the Crown and the First Nations represented by the chiefs. They have imposed obligations on the Crown to set aside land, provide assistance of the various types. But they do not impose any obligation upon citizens rather than the general obligation to obey the land, which is also incumbent on the First Nations by the text of the treaties. Now, this wording would change through with them. They won't have any legal effect. So why? Now, we should realize what's happening. In the past election campaign in 2014-15, the Liberals made many promises to indigenous voters, and those promises have never been fulfilled. They made a promise that they will adopt the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights. Till today, it has not been done, and now, instead of impossible legal change, they are offering words which have no meaning. One might argue that in the long run, words matter. But they matter in a certain context. Words in a citizenship guide would have no significance. They are just verbiage. I remember the great philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who said, words are wise men's counters. They do but reckon with them, but they are the money of the fools. Now, these foolish words in the proposed citizenship guide will tend to make new Canadians, and in fact all the Canadians, interlopers, trespassers in their own country. Now, what sort of satisfaction would the immigrants get when they read this thoroughly and juxtapose this with the actuality? The guide seems is a sort of a very silly competition with successive governing parties redefining the obligations. They are redefining the citizenship along ideological lines. The greatest gift a country can give to anybody is the gift of citizenship. And this should not be fickle. This should not be a platform for adhering or subscribing to the political code, be it conservative, be it liberal, or be it NDP. Now, what should be done? What should be done is that the neutral body should be created, and that neutral body should be given the job of rewriting our tours, guidebook, the Citizenship Guidebook, devoid of all political cant, devoid of all political ranting, devoid of all ideological change. Let's leave the politicking to the next election campaigns. There is sufficient time for that. Let's leave it to the town halls. Let's leave it to the hustling and the ballot. Let the guide be a guide to Canada, a guide to the Canadian values, and a guide to what Canada really is, rather than what it should be through the colored, tinted glasses that the political parties wear. Those colors might change. Canada is, or rather was, is, and remain the same. Let's not change that perception. Thank you.